The dust choked him, not from the trail, but from the memories rising with every hoofbeat. He'd ridden away a boy, full of fire, off to a war that had claimed so many. They'd called him dead, mourned him even. But he wasn't. He was back, a ghost in leather and denim, heading home. Except the home he remembered, the girl he'd sworn to, the land that ran in his veins. It all felt like a mirage, shimmering with betrayal and the bitter taste of what might have been. His heart, once a wild stallion, now beat with the slow, heavy thud of a man who'd seen too much and lost even more. The sun beat down on Elias Vance as he rode, a familiar heat that should have felt like a welcome home, but instead just amplified the tremor in his gut. His gaze swept over the familiar plains, now crisscrossed with fences he didn't recognize. The air, usually crisp with the scent of sage, carried a faint, unsettling hum, the sound of progress. He supposed, but to him it was a discordant note in the symphony of his past. He reined in his weary Mari, whisper at the top of a low rise, surveying what was once his land, the Vance spread. Only now, the lines were sharper, the fields too neat and a brand new. Imposing two-story house stood where his family's humble cabin had been. A rider emerged from the new house. A burly man with a handlebar mustache and a new, shiny rifle slung across his back. "Howdy, stranger," he called out, his voice thick with suspicion. "You're on private land." He moved with an arrogant ease that spoke of ownership, taking in every detail. The new fences, the well-fed cattle that weren't his breed, the man's posture, ready for trouble. "Just passing through," Elias replied, his voice a low rumble, worn from years of silence and the dust of forgotten battlefields. He felt the sting of injustice, a raw wound festering beneath his calm exterior. This land, his land, now belonged to strangers. The world had moved on without him, and he was an outsider, a ghost in his own life. The man's wary gaze lingered, assessing him. Elias knew he looked like any drifter, lean and sun-baked. But beneath the road dust was a man who knew every stone, every whisper of wind on this land. The thought of riding away, of turning his back on this desecrated memory, was a fleeting, tempting escape. But then he saw it, a single, gnarled oak tree, standing sentinel on a distant ridge. The same tree where he and Mary had carved their initials. He knew then he couldn't ride away. He had to know. He had to understand. He had to reclaim something. And Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't how he'd imagined his return. He'd pictured Mary, her red hair blazing in the sunlight, running to him, throwing her arms around his neck. He'd imagined his best friend, Jeb, clapping him on the back, a wide grin splitting his face. This, however, was a scene painted with shades of a nightmare. The man on the horse spotted Elias, his hand immediately going to his rifle. Elias kept his face a mask, his eyes, though. The burly man, who introduced himself as Silas, eyed Elias with a simmering suspicion, his hand still resting on his rifle. "Well, stranger, passing through usually means you keep moving. You ain't moving much, just admiring the view. Used to be a fine ranch around here." He watched for a flicker of recognition, but Silas's face remained a stony mask. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Silas dismounted, slowly, deliberately, as if giving Elias time to make a foolish move. Elias remained mounted, his weight shifted slightly in the saddle. "My business friend is my own." He could feel the rage bubbling, a hot, dangerous current beneath his calm exterior, but he couldn't let it show. Not yet. It was too striking, too vibrant, too much like Mary's, too much like his own. Elias felt a sudden, dizzying loss of control. The carefully constructed calm shattered. He had lost everything, his land, his sweetheart, and now he was facing the crushing realization that he might have lost even more than he could bear. His hand, shaking slightly, gripped the reins. He needed to ride, to think, to breathe. He turned Whisper slowly, his eyes still locked on the boy. The boy who might be his son. He needed answers, and Silas, for all his bluster, was a gatekeeper, not the source. He needed to see Jeb, to see Mary. He needed to understand the depth of this betrayal. His hand hovering near the worn butt of his own Colt. Elias met his gaze, unflinching. "That's because it is a fine ranch," Silas stated, puffing out his chest. "Belongs to Jebediah Vance now. He built it up from nothing after the original owner, Elias Vance. Well, he went off to war and never came back. Presumed dead, he was." The words hit Elias like a physical blow, each one a hammer stroke against his heart. "Jebediah Vance?" He repeated, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "He married Mary, too." Silas squinted. "You know Jebediah? And Mary?" He tripped, scattering a handful of wooden blocks across the dusty ground. Silas's attention shifted, his face softening imperceptibly as he knelt to help the boy. Elias's gaze lingered on the child, a boy with fiery red hair, just like Mary's, and a determined set to his jaw that was hauntingly familiar. A cold dread seeped into Elias's bones. This wasn't just Mary and Jeb. There was a child. His heart, already heavy, sank further. "What's your business with them?" His hand tightened on his rifle. A bitter laugh escaped Elias, dry and humorless. Suddenly, a young boy, no older than 10, came running from the house, his eyes wide. "Everything all right, Pa?" the boy asked, looking up at Silas. "Pa." The word echoed in Elias's head, a cruel twist of the knife. Silas was the boy's father. But the red hair? Elias rode for hours. The image of the red-haired boy burned into his mind. The plains gave way to rolling hills. He was younger, perhaps 18, kneeling in this very spot. The scent of pine needles and damp earth, a potent trigger. Not just bitterness, but a searing, agonizing ache of betrayal. And anger. A cold, steady rage that promised to consume him. He'd imagined many scenarios for his return, but never this. Never Mary, married to his best friend, raising a child that might be his on his land, under the protection of a man who now claimed it all. He remembered the day he left for the war, Mary's tear-streaked face, her hand gripping his, her promise to wait. He remembered Jeb's stoic handshake, his solemn vow to look after her, to look after the land. A wave of bitterness, sharp and acrid, washed over him. He'd trusted them. He trusted them with his life, with his love, with his future, and they had betrayed him. Carving their initials, EV plus MB, into the smooth bark of a sapling. Mary, her eyes sparkling, had leaned against him, her laughter like wind chimes. "We'll build our life here, Elias," she'd whispered, her breath warm on his neck. "Always, always." The word now felt like a cruel mockery. Then to the rugged, familiar ascent of the Blackwood Mountains, the same mountains where he and Mary had stolen secret kisses, where he and Jeb had hunted deer and dreamed of futures. The sun was setting, painting the western sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. The air grew colder, and with it, a chilling clarity settled over him. He had two paths. He could turn and ride away, let the past remain buried, and find a new life somewhere else, far from the ghosts of what might have been. Or he could confront them, demand answers, reclaim what was lost, even if it meant tearing apart the lives they had built. The thought of riding away was tempting, a chance to escape the pain. But the image of the red-haired boy, the echoes of Mary's laugh, the memory of his father's proud face as he looked out over the Vance spread. It pulled him back, a powerful, irresistible tide. To run would be to abandon himself, to truly die this time. He knew what he had to do, revenge or redemption. He wasn't sure which path he was on, but he knew it led back to them. He dismounted at the base of a towering pine, its bark scarred by lightning, a landmark he knew intimately. He sank to the ground, the weight of his saddle feeling heavier than a coffin lid. A sharp, vivid memory, unbidden, sprang to life. He closed his eyes. The raw emotion, long suppressed by the numbness of war, clawed its way to the surface. He opened his eyes. Elias rode back to the Vance Ranch under the pale light of a rising moon. The house, once a beacon of his dreams, now loomed, stark and unwelcoming. He dismounted silently, tying Whisper to the fence, his hand never straying far from his pistol. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, and a tension that hummed in his very bones. He approached the front door and knocked, the sound echoing hollowly in the night. Footsteps sounded within, and then the door opened, revealing Jebediah Vance. Jeb looked older, his face etched with lines Elias didn't recognize, but his eyes, though wary, were still the same piercing blue. The army, they sent word. A grave, a cross with your name. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the weight of years and unspoken truths hanging heavy between them. Seems like some folks are too eager to bury the past. Her face pale, her red hair a fiery halo in the dim light. The sight of her, the way she looked at him, twisted a knot in his gut. He had imagined this reunion 1,000 times. About Mary, about everything. His gaze shifted to Mary, holding hers, and about the boy. But never like this, never with this chasm of betrayal between them. Presumed dead, we moved on. Elias roared, his hand instinctively going to his pistol. I came back for what was mine. Jeb's face contorted, a mixture of rage and defensiveness. He's my son now, Elias. You forfeited your claim when you rode off to war and left us behind. The air crackled with danger, the lives of everyone present hanging in the balance. Then, a small, sleepy voice drifted from inside the house. Mama? What's all the noise? It was the boy, the red-haired boy. The sound broke the spell, and Silas slowly lowered his rifle, his eyes still fixed on Elias. The boy's innocent query had, for a fleeting moment, pulled them back from the precipice of violence, but the confrontation had irrevocably shattered the fragile peace, leaving a raw, open wound. He was asking about the land, asking about Mary. Doesn't sound like friendship to me. Elias's voice rose, the anger finally breaking through his carefully constructed calm. You married my sweetheart. You took my land. You raised my son. Her eyes, once full of youthful vivacity, now held a haunted, fragile beauty. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That's enough, stranger. Get off this land. Elias? She breathed, the name a question, a plea, a ghost of a memory. Elias? Jeb's voice was a rough whisper, disbelief warring with something else. Fear? Guilt? Hello, Jeb, Elias replied, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Surprise? Friend? Before Jeb could respond, Mary appeared behind him. The one and only, Elias said, his gaze fixed on Mary. We thought you were dead, Jeb finally managed, his voice regaining a semblance of control, though it was still laced with a tremor. Funny how those things happen, Elias countered, his voice sharp. Silas emerged from the shadows, his rifle now held loosely in his hands. What's going on here, Jebediah? Jeb held up a hand, silencing him. It's all right, Silas. This is an old friend. Silas scoffed, his eyes narrowing. He's right, Elias stated, his voice ringing with a cold authority. I want to know, Jeb, about the land. Mary flinched, her eyes widening in fear. Jeb's jaw tightened. That's none of your business, Elias. You were gone. Moved on? The last words hung in the air, a thunderclap in the silent night. I left to fight for this country. The tension in the air was palpable, stretched taut to a breaking point. Silas raised his rifle, aiming directly at Elias. No! Mary cried out, stepping forward, placing herself between Silas and Elias. Don't, please, Silas. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Silas's finger hesitated on the trigger. Elias's hand remained on his gun. The tense standoff dissolved as the boy's voice pierced the night. Silas, his face a mix of frustration and paternal concern, moved to comfort the child. A phantom ache from an old war wound flaring with the emotional turmoil. He felt raw, exposed. The confrontation had taken its toll, leaving him emotionally drained and physically weary. The new tools, the prosperity Jeb had carved out of his absence. "You could have waited," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You could have sought me out. I didn't just vanish." Jeb asked, his voice now tinged with a desperate resignation. "You gonna take it all back? Destroy what we've built?" A beam he had helped his father put in place years ago. In his mind, he saw the initials he and Mary had carved into the oak, an element from the first chapter now re-emerging with a new agonizing meaning. It wasn't just about the land, or Mary, or even the boy. It was about the future, about the consequences of his return. A sudden, unexpected clarity pierced through the haze of his anger. He could reclaim everything, legally, forcefully. But at what cost? To shatter this family, to leave Mary and the boy adrift, to perhaps even spark a violent confrontation with Silas and his men. It would be a hollow victory, leaving only ruins in its wake. The solitude of the cowboy, a familiar companion on lonely trails, now felt like a crushing burden, even with Jeb just a few steps ahead. He was among them, yet utterly alone. A chance to find a new kind of peace, not through reclamation, but through a different form of justice. It would require him to let go of the past, to sacrifice his pride, to accept a truth that was profoundly painful. He had to choose, to cling to what was rightfully his and tear apart a life, or to step back and find a different way to heal. He knew his decision would shape not only his future, but theirs as well. He took a deep breath, the silence of the barn stretching, pregnant with his unmade choice. A choice that would determine if he rode toward vengeance or towards an uncertain, fragile redemption. Mary, her shoulders slumped, ushered the boy back inside, her eyes avoiding Elias's. Jeb, his jaw still clenched, gestured for Elias to follow him away from the house, towards the barn. The silence between them was heavier than any words, a suffocating blanket woven from years of shared history and recent betrayals. Elias walked with a slight limp. Inside the barn, the scent of hay and horseflesh filled the air, a stark contrast to the dust and gunpowder of his memories. Jeb leaned against a stall, his face shadowed. "Heard you were dead, Elias. Saw the official papers. It was war, Elias. Men went missing all the time. Mary, she was grieving. And me, I was just trying to keep the ranch going, keep what was left of our lives together." He paused, then looked Elias square in the eye. "I loved her, Elias. I still do. And that boy, he's everything to me. A grave with your name on it." The easy answers, the black and white villainy he'd envisioned for Jeb, crumbled. He saw a man who had made difficult choices in impossible circumstances, a man who had loved, and perhaps truly believed he was doing the right thing. It didn't erase the pain, but it complicated the picture. What was I supposed to do? His voice was low, devoid of its earlier anger, replaced by a weary defensiveness. Elias looked around the familiar barn. Seeing the upgrades, Jeb ran a hand through his hair. The words, spoken with a raw honesty, hit Elias hard. "What do you want, Elias?" Elias looked at the rough-hewn beam above them. A different path, a risky one, presented itself. The first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky as Elias stood before Jeb and Mary, the red-haired boy clutching Mary's hand. The decision, born in the lonely quiet of the barn, felt heavy but right. "I won't take the land," Elias said, his voice raspy from the long night and the weight of his words. "It's yours, Jeb. You built it. You nurtured it." He looked at Mary, his gaze softening, a flicker of the old affection in his eyes. As he swung into the saddle, he cast one last look back at the ranch, at the figures standing by the house. He was the man who rode back, not to conquer, but to endure. The trail home wasn't a straight line, but a winding path through sorrow and acceptance. And as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the plains, Elias Vance rode not into the sunset, but towards a new, uncertain dawn, forever marked by the indelible truth that some things, once lost, are found again, not in the reclaiming but in the letting go. And the boy, he deserves a home, a father. He paused, the finality of his words a bitter swallow. I'm not here to tear apart what you've made. Jeb's face, etched with weariness, held a mix of relief and confusion. Mary's eyes, though still tear-filled, showed a fragile understanding. Silas, standing a respectful distance away, his rifle now nowhere in sight, watched Elias with a grudging respect. But this isn't over, Jeb, Elias continued, his voice gaining a quiet intensity. There are things that need to be made right. I won't claim the land, but I won't disappear into the dust either. I'm staying, for a time, to ensure that what was lost isn't forgotten, and that what was broken can, somehow, begin to mend. He looked at the boy, who stared back with wide, curious eyes. Elias felt a pang, a deep, aching sense of what might have been. But he also saw a chance, not for reclamation, but for connection. He wouldn't be a father in the traditional sense, not now, but perhaps an uncle, a protector, a living memory of a past that had shaped them all. He turned to leave, his steps slow but resolute. He wasn't riding away, not this time. His journey had taken him far from where he started, and the destination wasn't what he'd envisioned. There was no grand victory, no crushing defeat, just the quiet, complex truth of a life transformed. The war had taken his youth, his love, his land. But his return had given him something else, the chance to choose a different path, to seek a deeper understanding, and to find a fragile peace amidst the remnants of a shattered past. He reached Whisper, placing a hand on her neck.